My name is Lily. I'm 26 years old. And for my entire adult life, my mother treated me like a bank account with a pulse. I kept telling myself that stepping up is just what a good daughter does. But the moment that finally made the truth impossible to ignore came yesterday, inside a quiet clinic waiting room. After working 3 jobs to send my mother $27,400 for a life-saving surgery, I flew down to surprise her at the recovery ward. But the head nurse just frowned at her monitor. There was no record of her. There was no surgery. 3 patients in the lobby watched in dead silence as a receptionist handed me a misplaced travel folder my mother had left at the intake desk, containing her luggage tags and 2 first-class plane tickets. My hands started shaking against the laminate counter. I emptied my savings. I slept 4 hours a night. I bled myself dry. She packed for a resort. I thought I was saving my mother's life. I was wrong. She had no idea I was standing in that clinic, holding the exact destination of my sacrifice. What happened next wouldn't just ruin her luxury getaway. It was about to tear open years of lies and completely destroy her reputation. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Let me take you back 8 months, to the day I was given the price of my freedom. It started with a family dinner, the kind where I usually end up doing the dishes while everyone else talks about my younger brother Leo's potential. Leo is 22, but in my mother's eyes, he's still a delicate seedling that needs constant watering, usually with my money. I was sitting at the far end of the table, still wearing my nursing scrubs from a 12-hour shift. My back ached and my eyes felt like they had sand in them. Across from me, Leo was showing off his new sneakers. They were limited edition. I knew they cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Lily, stop yawning," my mother said, not looking up from her plate. "It's disrespectful to the meal I cooked. You should be grateful you have a home to come to for dinner." I didn't remind her that I pay half the mortgage on that home. I didn't remind her that I'd also paid the electric bill that morning because it was 3 days past due. I just picked up my fork. In our house, there is a very specific hierarchy. At the top is my mother, the queen of everything I sacrificed for you. Below her is Leo, the prince who can do no wrong. At the very bottom, holding up the entire structure until her shoulders snap, is me. That was the rule. Family means sacrifice, and in our family, I was the only one doing the sacrificing. Later that evening, the air in the living room changed. It got heavy. My mother sat on the sofa, clutching a throw pillow to her chest. She started talking about a dull ache in her back that had turned into something sharp. She told us she'd been to see a specialist, secretly, she claimed, because she didn't want to worry us. "It's my spine," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The doctor said it's degenerating. If I don't get the surgery within the year, I might never walk again." She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. It wasn't an official hospital bill, just some notes she'd scribbled down. The number at the bottom was circled in red, $27,400. "Insurance won't touch it," she said, looking directly at me. "They call it a pre-existing condition. They're happy to let me rot in a wheelchair, Lily. After all the years I spent carrying you and Leo, this is how it ends." Leo looked at me too. "You've got to do something, Lil. You're the one with the steady career. I'm still finding my feet. You can't just let Mom lose her legs." I looked at my bank account on my phone under the table. I had $4,000 saved for a down payment on a small condo. It was my exit plan. My mother saw me looking at the phone and her eyes filled with tears instantly. "I guess I'll start looking at ramps for the front porch," she said. "I'll get used to being a burden. It's my own fault for expecting my children to care about my life as much as I cared about theirs." The guilt hit me like a physical weight. That's the thing about our family myth. A good daughter doesn't have a savings account if her mother has a problem. I felt the condo, the privacy, and the silence I'd been dreaming of slipping through my fingers. "I'll find a way," I said. "I'll get the money." My mother didn't say thank you. She just exhaled, leaned back, and told Leo to get her a glass of water because talking about her health had exhausted her. The next day, I went to the Cloverleaf Diner. I already had my full-time nursing job and a weekend gig doing data entry. I needed a third. The manager, Mrs. Hayes, was a woman who looked like she'd been carved out of old oak. She took one look at my application, then at the dark circles under my eyes, and hired me for the graveyard shift. 4 nights later, I was leaning against the counter in the back room, trying to remember how to breathe. I had worked 18 hours straight between the hospital and the diner. My old, cracked work name tag was pinned crookedly to my shirt, and my hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped a tray of mugs. Mrs. Hayes walked in. She didn't say anything at first. She just took the tray from my hands and set it down. Then she went to the stove, ladled a bowl of thick chicken soup, and pushed it toward me. "Sit," she said. It wasn't a suggestion. "I'm fine, Mrs. Hayes. I just need to finish the side work." "You can't pour from an empty cup, sweetheart," she interrupted. She sat down across from me, watching me with eyes that had clearly seen every kind of trouble a person can carry. "You're 26 years old and you look like you're carrying the weight of the world. No surgery is worth a girl killing herself in my kitchen." I didn't tell her it was for my mother's spine. I didn't tell her I felt like I was drowning. I just ate the soup. For the first time in months, someone had looked at me and seen a person, not a bank. That was the only warmth I had. Outside that kitchen, the world was getting colder. My mother started sending me links to luxury recovery suites. She wanted to stay in post-op, claiming she needed the best care to survive. Leo stopped answering my texts about the utility bills. I was working myself into the ground, $100 at a time. I thought I was being a hero. I thought I was the only thing standing between my mother and a wheelchair. I was the only one paying attention. I tried to set a boundary once. Just 2 days after the dinner, I called my mother. I had spent the night staring at my bank app, watching the little bar graph of my savings. I'd worked 3 years to get that $4,000. It was my safety net, my one day I'll have a door I can lock fund. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "I've been looking into the hospital's financial aid office. They have payment plans. If we apply for a low-income grant, we might be able to get the cost down to." The silence on the other end was so sharp I could feel it. "Financial aid," she whispered. Her voice sounded like it was coming through a mouthful of glass. "You want me to beg for charity? After I spent 20 years making sure you never had to feel poor, you want to put my name on a list for the indigent?" "It's not charity, Mom. It's a system to help people." "I am dying, Lily," she barked. The whisper was gone. "My spine is crumbling. I can barely get out of bed to make your brother a sandwich, and you're calling me to talk about paperwork. You have the money. I know you do. I saw you looking at your phone." "That's my condo money, Mom. That's everything I have." "Exactly," she said. "It's money. I'm a human being. I didn't realize there was a price tag on my ability to walk. If $27,000 is worth more to you than your mother's life, then just say it. Say, Mom, I'd rather you be in a wheelchair than me lose my deposit." Then she hung up. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. I felt sick. 5 minutes later, my phone started vibrating. It was my Aunt Sarah. "Lily, what on earth is wrong with you?" Sarah didn't even say hello. "Your mother is in hysterics. She says you told her she isn't worth the effort. Do you have any idea how much she sacrificed for you when your father lost his job? She wore shoes with holes in them for 3 years so you could have those dance lessons." "I never said she wasn't worth it, Aunt Sarah. She's terrified, Lily. And now she's terrified and alone because her own daughter is counting pennies while she faces surgery. If something happens to her because you delayed this, I hope you're prepared to explain that to the rest of the family at the funeral." That was the first crack in the world I'd tried to build. My aunt didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't ask how I was going to pay my own rent. She just delivered the verdict. That night, I didn't sleep. I realized that if I didn't find that money, I wouldn't just lose my mother's love, I would become the villain in every story my family told for the next 50 years. I would be the girl who let her mother go paralyzed over a bank balance. I called my mother back the next morning. My hand was shaking so hard I had to use both to hold the phone. "I'll get it," I said. "I'll take the night shifts. I'll find the rest. Just stop crying, please." "Thank you, Lily," she said, her voice instantly smooth as if the hysterics had never happened. "I knew you were a good girl deep down. I'll send you the account info for the deposit. The clinic needs the first $10,000 by the end of the month to hold the surgical suite." I went to my bank that afternoon and transferred my entire condo savings. $4,000. My exit plan was gone in 3 clicks of a mouse. As I walked out of the bank, I looked at my reflection in the glass door. I looked pale. I looked like someone who had just been robbed. But the worst part wasn't the money. The worst part was the realization that my mother hadn't even hesitated to take it. She didn't ask if I'd be okay. She didn't ask how I'd eat. The old arrangement was simple. I gave and they took. I thought by giving more, I could finally earn a seat at the table. I didn't know I was just making the table bigger for them. I went straight from the bank to the diner. I had 12 hours of pouring coffee ahead of me. I had $42 left in my checking account and $23,400 more to go. I was officially a ghost in my own life. I worked 16 hours a day, every day, for 6 months. My life became a blur of hospital linoleum and diner grease. My health was crumbling. I was losing weight, my skin looked gray, and the crack in my plastic work name tag had branched out like a spider web. I reached a point where I couldn't do it alone. I called my dad. He's always been the quiet one, the peacemaker who stays in the garage or behind his newspaper while my mother runs the show. I thought, surely, he sees what this is doing to me. "Dad," I said, meeting him for a quick coffee between shifts. I didn't even order anything, I just wanted to sit in the quiet. "I'm exhausted. I've already sent Mom 20,000, but I still have 7,000 to go. Can you help? Even just a small loan, or maybe Leo could get a part-time job." My dad didn't look at me. He stirred his black coffee and stared at the window. "You know we have to pay for Leo's college, Lily," he said, his voice flat. "He's in his final year. We can't distract him with a job now or he might lose his focus. And your mother, she's sensitive. If we ask her to scale back on the recovery suite or the specialists, she'll think we don't care." "I'm working 3 jobs, Dad. I haven't slept more than 4 hours a night in weeks." "You're young," he said, finally looking at me. There was no pity in his eyes, only a plea for me to keep the peace. "You're strong. Don't upset your mom, Lily. Just do what you have to do. We're all so proud of your sacrifice." That was the punishment for asking, a reminder that my suffering was the only thing keeping the family stable. My mother made it worse. Every few days, she would send me a photo. Sometimes it was a blurry shot of a hospital corridor. Other times it was a close-up of a medical monitor she'd found online, though I didn't know that then. The captions were always the same. "Pain is bad today. I just hope I live to see Christmas." Or, "The doctor says the clock is ticking. I'm trying to stay brave for you and Leo." One night, after a particularly brutal double shift, my phone buzzed. It was a group text from my mother to the whole family. It was a photo of her sitting in a recliner with a blanket over her legs, looking frail. "So grateful for my family," she wrote. "Especially Leo, who stayed with me all afternoon to keep my spirits up. It's hard being trapped in this body, but your love is my medicine." There was no mention of the $22,000 I had already transferred to her personal account. There was no mention of the fact that Leo was only staying with her because he lived there rent-free while I paid the bills. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. I was losing my hair, my bank account was a desert, and my own father was telling me not to bother the golden child. Dad called me later that night. "I saw the text," he said. "Your mother is so happy." "I'm proud of your sacrifice, Lily. It's the right thing to do." When he said those words, proud of your sacrifice, it didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like a life sentence. He wasn't proud of me. He was relieved that it was me bleeding out and not him. I realized then that I was completely alone. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a structural support beam. And they would let me crack right down the middle as long as the roof didn't touch their heads. I stopped crying that night. I just went back to work. I hit my limit on a Tuesday. I remember the exact smell of the diner, burnt decaf and industrial lemon cleaner when the floor suddenly tilted. I was reaching for a stack of side plates, and the next thing I knew, I was staring at the underside of a table. My knees had just given out. Everything went quiet for a second. Then I heard the frantic scraping of chairs. "Lily, Lily, honey, talk to me." It was Mrs. Hayes. She was kneeling on the linoleum next to me, her hands steady on my shoulders. I tried to sit up, but my body felt like it was made of lead. As I pushed myself up, my old work name tag caught on the edge of the table. The crack that had been growing for months finally snapped. The plastic hissed as it broke in half, falling to the floor in two jagged pieces. I looked at those pieces and started to sob. I wasn't crying because I was hurt. I was crying because I had nothing left to give, and the world was still asking for more. Mrs. Hayes didn't make a scene. She helped me into the back office and sat me down on a milk crate. She stayed with me while I shook, handing me paper towels for my eyes. My purse had spilled open on the floor, and my latest bank statement was lying right there, face up. I'd highlighted the transfers to my mother in neon yellow, a trail of my own blood on paper. Mrs. Hayes picked it up. She didn't mean to pry, but the numbers were hard to miss. Her brow furrowed as she looked at the dates and the amounts. "Lily," she said softly, "I've seen a lot of medical bills in my time. My late husband spent 3 months in the ICU, but no hospital I know requires cash transfers to a patient's personal checking account. They bill insurance or they set up a portal. This looks like a gift." "It's for her spine," I whispered. "She said they needed it up front." "Up front and in her name." Mrs. Hayes looked at me, her eyes filled with a sudden, sharp clarity. "Lily, look at these dates. You sent $10,000 on a Friday, and that Sunday your mother posted a photo of a new patio set. I remember you showing it to me because you were glad she was comfortable." I stared at the statement. The math didn't add up. The desperation in my mother's voice didn't match the luxury of the recovery she was describing. I looked at the broken name tag in my lap. I had destroyed my dreams, my health, and my future for a woman who was treating my sacrifice like a lottery win. "I have to know," I said. "Yes, you do," Mrs. Hayes replied. "And you aren't going to find the truth by working another shift." I wiped my eyes and looked at the numbers. If they wanted to play these games, I was done being the prize. I stood up, my legs still shaky, but my head finally clear. The floor had stopped tilting. The damage didn't stay between me and my mother. It started to spread, leaking out into the rest of the family like a slow poison. Within a week of my collapse at the diner, I realized my mother had been busy. She hadn't been researching surgeons. She'd been building a cage for me. The first hint was a text from my cousin Mia. "I heard you're giving your mom a hard time about the surgery. Honestly, Lily, after everything she did for you, it's a bit much to make her feel like a burden just because you have to work a few extra hours." Then came the phone calls from neighbors I hadn't talked to in years. They just happened to run into my mother at the grocery store, where she'd apparently been leaning heavily on her cart and sighing about how her daughter was reluctantly helping, but making sure everyone knew how much of a sacrifice it was. The narrative was set. I was the bitter, ungrateful daughter who was weaponizing her help. I didn't defend myself. I didn't have the energy. I was still working 3 jobs. my body a dull ache that never went away. I felt like a ghost walking through a world where everyone had already decided I was the villain. The infection even reached Leo. He sent me a message on a Thursday night while I was prepping for my diner shift. "You could be a little nicer to Mom, Lily. She's having a harder time right now than you think. Your attitude is really stressing her out, and the doctor said stress is bad for her spine. Just think about someone other than yourself for once." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. I had just transferred another $3,000 that morning. The boiling point came a week before the surgery. My parents held a family dinner, a last meal, my mother called it, before she went under the knife. I didn't want to go, but I knew if I stayed away, it would only confirm the lies. I walked into the house at 6:00 p.m., still in my nursing scrubs, my skin the color of damp paper. The room went quiet the moment I crossed the threshold. My Aunt Sarah was there, along with two of my uncles and their wives. They were all crowded around the living room, drinks in hand. Nobody greeted me. They just looked at me and then looked away. I saw my mother sitting in her sick chair in the corner, wrapped in a pashmina I had bought her for her birthday. She looked perfectly fine, but the moment she saw me, her posture slumped and she let out a long, theatrical sigh. "Oh, Lily's here," she said, her voice a thin reed. "I was worried you'd be too busy to come say goodbye to your mother." Leo was standing near the fireplace, leaning against the mantel. He was wearing a brand new watch. It was a heavy, stainless steel piece that caught the light every time he moved his arm. He saw me looking at it and quickly pulled his sleeve down. "Nice watch, Leo," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, hollow and dry. "Oh, a gift from a friend," he said, not looking me in the eye. "Don't start, Lily, not tonight." I didn't start, I just stood there. My father walked past me to refill a bowl of chips. He didn't look at me either. It was as if I had become invisible, or worse, an unpleasant smell they were all trying to ignore. The seating arrangement at dinner told the whole story. My mother was at the head of the table, flanked by Leo and my father. My aunts and uncles filled the middle. I was placed at the very end, next to the swinging door to the kitchen. I wasn't part of the family, I was the staff that had been allowed to sit down. Throughout the meal, they talked about the Maldives, not as a trip they were taking, but as a dream Leo had. "I've always wanted to see the crystal blue water," Leo said, helping himself to more roast beef. "Maybe after Mom is recovered, we can all go as a family." "That would be lovely," my mother said, patting his hand. "We'll need something to celebrate my new lease on life. After all this darkness, we deserve some light." No one asked me how I was doing. No one asked how I was managing 3 jobs. No one asked about the dark circles under my eyes or why my hands were shaking as I held my fork. I sat there in silence, eating my salad, watching Leo's new watch flash in the candlelight. I realized then that the lie hadn't just been accepted, it had been celebrated. They weren't just taking my money, they were feasting on it. That was the last time I felt like I had a family. I just quietly finished my meal, waited for the right moment, and walked out into the night. I had 7 days left until D-Day, the day of the surgery, or, as I was beginning to suspect, the day of my final disappearance from their lives. Having transferred the last of the money, $27,400 in total, I felt like a hollow shell of a person. I had no savings, no plans, and nothing left but a crushing sense of relief that the surgery was finally happening. My mother had texted me the name of a prestigious orthopedic clinic 2 towns over. She said she'd be checking in at 8:00 a.m. on Tuesday. I decided I couldn't just stay at work. I wanted to be there when she woke up. I wanted her to see my face and know that I had kept my word. I wanted to see her walk again so that every hour of sleep I'd lost would finally mean something. I drove to the clinic on Tuesday morning. I was still wearing my nursing scrubs from the night shift at the hospital. I walked through the sliding glass doors, my heart thumping against my ribs. The lobby was quiet, filled with expensive-looking art and the scent of eucalyptus. I walked up to the reception desk. "Hi, I'm looking for the surgical ward. My mother, Diane, is scheduled for a spinal procedure this morning." The receptionist, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair and a neutral expression, tapped at her keyboard. She frowned, she tapped again. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't see a Diane scheduled for today. In fact, we don't have any major surgeries booked for this morning. The surgical wing is undergoing a floor-sealing treatment today." "That can't be right," I said, my voice rising. "She's been talking about this for months. I transferred the funds. She's here. Check under emergency or direct intake." The receptionist looked at me with a flicker of pity. "Honey, we don't take direct intake cash transfers, and we don't have any record of your mother in our system for the last 5 years, but—" She stopped and looked toward a small side desk where a stack of folders sat. "Wait, is your mother a tall woman, blonde hair, usually wears a pashmina?" "Yes," I whispered. "She was here about an hour ago. She didn't check in. She asked to use our lobby restroom and then sat over there for a few minutes. She must have forgotten this." She reached over and handed me a bright blue travel folder. It had the clinic's logo on the front, the kind of folder they give you for patient education materials. But when I opened it, I didn't see X-rays or surgical prep instructions. I saw 2 first-class plane tickets to the Maldives. The departure was for 6:00 p.m. the following day. The names on the tickets were Diane and Leo. Tucked behind the tickets was a resort confirmation for a 10-day stay at an overwater villa. The total cost of the package was exactly $24,000. My hands started shaking. I walked out of the clinic and sat in my car. I couldn't breathe. I looked at the tickets, then at the surgery texts on my phone, then at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked like a ghost. I had spent 6 months killing myself so my mother and brother could go on a luxury vacation. I didn't call my mother, I didn't call my dad, I called the only person who had actually looked at me in the last 6 months. "Mrs. Hayes," I said when she picked up. My voice was just a breath. "It's Lily, you were right, the hospital doesn't exist." "Lily, where are you?" "I'm at the clinic, only she's not here. She's going to the Maldives, with Leo. I'm holding the tickets." There was a long silence on the other end. I expected her to gasp or tell me she was sorry. Instead, I heard the sound of a heavy ledger being closed. "Listen to me carefully, Lily," Mrs. Hayes said, her voice like iron. "Do not call them, do not text them, do not go home and scream. If you do, they will turn it around on you before you can blink. Do you still have the folder?" "Yes." "Take a photo of every single page in that folder. The tickets, the resort booking, the confirmation numbers, everything. Then you put that folder back exactly where you found it or leave it with the nurse. Then you get in your car and meet me at the First National Bank on 4th Street. My brother-in-law is the branch manager. We are going to see exactly where that money went." I can't," I stammered. "It's a wire transfer, it's gone." "Nothing is gone until the plane leaves the dirt, Lily. Move." I did exactly what she said. I photographed the evidence. My hands were steady now, fueled by a cold, clinical kind of shock. I walked back into the clinic, handed the folder to the receptionist, and said my mother must have left it by mistake. As I drove to the bank, I passed a billboard for a luxury travel agency. It showed a woman lounging on a white sand beach. I realized that woman was my mother, and the sand was made of my blood, my sweat, and my stolen years. The document in the folder was real. The operating room was a fantasy. There was only white sand and my empty bank account. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't just the girl who paid. I was the girl with the receipts. I met Mrs. Hayes at the bank 30 minutes later. I felt like I was walking through a dream where the floor was made of glass. Every person I passed on the sidewalk looked like they were in on the joke. I kept checking my phone, expecting a text from my mother saying she was out of surgery, but there was nothing. just the silence of a woman who thought she'd finally crossed the finish line. Mrs. Hayes was waiting by the heavy glass doors of the bank. She looked at my face, then at the photo of the tickets on my phone. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just took my arm and led me inside. "My brother-in-law, Jim, is in the back," she said. "He's already pulled the records for the wire transfers you initiated." We sat in a small, windowless office that smelled like old paper and expensive air conditioning. Jim was a man with a tired face and a very sharp suit. He laid out 3 sheets of paper in front of me. They were the digital footprints of my life's work. "Lily," Jim said, "you sent these funds as a direct wire transfer to a personal checking account. Usually, that's a one-way street. But because you flagged this as a medical emergency in the memo line, and because we have documentation from the clinic today proving they have no record of you or this procedure, we can initiate a fraud reversal." "A reversal?" I asked. My voice felt small. "You can get it back." "Not all of it," Jim cautioned. "The first $10,000 you sent months ago is likely gone, already spent or moved. But the $17,400 you sent over the last 8 weeks, that's still sitting in her account. It hasn't cleared the final settlement for her travel agency payment yet. If we freeze the account now for investigation, she can't touch it. And if we prove the medical necessity was a fabrication to solicit funds under false pretenses, the bank can pull it back." I looked at the numbers. $17,400. It wasn't my full $27,000, but it was my life. It was my breath. "There's a catch," Jim said. "To do this, I have to file a formal fraud report. The bank's compliance team will handle it, but they might involve local law enforcement if the amount is this high. Your mother will be notified the moment the freeze happens." I thought about my mother's face when she'd told me she was dying. I thought about the photos of hospital hallways she'd pulled from the internet. I thought about Leo's new watch. Most of all, I thought about the first-class tickets to the Maldives while I was sleeping on a locker room floor because I couldn't afford the gas to drive home between shifts. The doubt hit me for a second. If I did this, I wasn't just taking my money back. I was blowing up the family. My dad would never forgive me for humiliating them. My aunt would call me a monster. I would be alone. Then I remembered the family dinner. I remembered sitting at the end of the table by the kitchen door, invisible and exhausted, while they planned a vacation with my blood. "Do it," I said. "File the report, freeze everything." Jim nodded and started typing. The sound of the keys was like a rhythmic drumbeat. "It's done," he said after a few minutes. "The funds are locked. Her debit card will decline the next time she tries to use it. And the travel agency's final payment will fail tomorrow morning, 6 hours before the flight." I stood up. I didn't feel happy. I just felt heavy, like a fever had finally broken. I was no longer a daughter waiting for a thank you. I was a creditor closing a bad account. "What now?" I asked Mrs. Hayes as we walked out. "Now," she said, "you go home, you eat, you sleep, and you wait for the phone to ring. Because once that card declines, the mask is going to fall off, and you need to be ready to catch it." I looked at my phone. 24 hours, that was exactly how much time was left before their flight was supposed to take off. I went to my car and drove away from the bank. I wasn't reactive anymore. I was strategic. I didn't head to the hospital. I didn't head to my mother's house. I went to a small park, sat on a bench, and watched the sun go down. For the first time in 8 months, I didn't have to work a night shift. I was just waiting for the storm to arrive. The night before the flight was oddly quiet. My mother sent me a text at 9:00 p.m. "I'm so scared about tomorrow's anesthesia, Lily. Please pray for me, sweetie. I just want to wake up and be able to walk again." I stared at the screen for a long time. The reversal had been processed. The bank's fraud department had already flagged the account. In her world, she was still the victim of a tragic illness preparing for a miracle cure. In reality, she was a woman whose stolen funding had just been vaporized. "I'll be right there, Mom," I replied. I meant it. I wouldn't miss this for anything. I drove past their house around 10:30 p.m. The lights were all on. Through the living room window, I could see Leo and my mother. They weren't praying. They were surrounded by open designer suitcases, the expensive kind with the hard shells. Leo was holding up a brand new tropical print shirt against his chest, admiring himself in the hallway mirror. My mother was folding silk dresses. There was a bottle of wine open on the coffee table. They were celebrating. They looked like two people who had just won the lottery, not a woman facing a major spinal reconstruction and her concerned caregiver. The false confidence was radiating off them. They were so sure I was tucked away in my apartment, exhausted and broken, still believing the lie. I went back to my place and sat in the dark. My own suitcase was already packed, but not for a vacation. It was packed because I knew that by tomorrow night, I wouldn't be welcome in that house ever again. The next morning, the surgery day arrived. I didn't go to the clinic. I waited until 1:00 p.m., 4 hours before they were supposed to leave for the airport. I knew the travel agency's final payment would have attempted to clear by now. I knew the hotel booking would have been canceled. I knew the first-class dream was currently a pile of declined transaction codes. My phone started blowing up around 1:15 p.m. 14 missed calls from my mother. 6 from Leo, 3 from my father. I didn't answer. I wanted the pressure to build. I wanted them to feel that specific, cold panic of a plan falling apart in the final hour. I wanted them to scramble for excuses and find none. I took a deep breath, clutched the travel folder I'd retrieved from the clinic in my hand, and drove to their house. I didn't knock. I just opened the door and walked in. The air in the house was vibrating with tension. My mother was standing in the kitchen, her face a blotchy red, screaming into her phone at a customer service representative. Leo was pacing the floor, his face pale, frantically tapping at his laptop. "I don't care what the computer says," my mother shrieked. "The money is there, my daughter transferred it herself. You cannot cancel my booking." Then she saw me. She froze. She didn't drop the phone, but her hand started to shake. "Lily," she gasped. "Lily, thank God you're here. Something terrible has happened. The bank. There's been a mistake, a horrible mistake." I didn't say anything. I just stood in the doorway, the girl they thought they'd bled dry, and watched the mask begin to slip. The room was full of people when I walked in. It wasn't just my parents and Leo. My Aunt Sarah was there, along with my Uncle Bob and 2 neighbors from down the street. They had gathered for a send-off dinner, a quiet meal to support my mother before her big surgery. The table was set with the good china. There was a roast in the oven. "Lily, finally," my father said, standing up. He looked relieved to see me, probably thinking I was there to fix whatever was happening with the bank. "Something is wrong with your mother's account. The travel agency canceled the booking, and the bank is saying the funds are under review. You need to call them and tell them it was an authorized transfer." I didn't move from the entryway. I didn't take off my coat. I just reached into my bag and pulled out the blue travel folder I'd taken from the clinic. "The bank didn't make a mistake, Dad," I said. My voice was steady, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I did. I made the mistake of believing there was a surgery." I walked over to the dining table and dropped the folder right next to my mother's wine glass. The first-class tickets to the Maldives slid out onto the white tablecloth. The room went dead silent. My Aunt Sarah leaned forward, squinting at the paper. "What is this?" she asked, picking up one of the tickets. "Maldives. Diane, I thought you were going into the clinic tomorrow morning." My mother's face went from blotchy red to a sickly, pale gray. She tried to reach for the tickets, but her hand was shaking so badly she knocked over her wine. Red liquid spread across the tablecloth like a wound. It's for after," my mother stammered, her eyes darting around the room, looking for a way out. "The doctor said." He said I'd need a tropical climate for the recovery. The humidity helps the nerves knit back together. It's medical, Sarah. It's all part of the treatment. Medical? I asked. I pulled out my phone and held it up. I have the recording of the receptionist at the clinic, Mom. They haven't seen you in 5 years. There is no surgery. There is no recovery suite. There is just a $24,000 vacation paid for by the daughter who hasn't slept more than 4 hours a night for 6 months. Leo stood up then, his face flushing with anger. You're making a scene, Lily. Sit down and shut up. You're embarrassing Mom in front of everyone. I'm embarrassing her. I turned to face him. Nice watch, Leo. Did the friend who gave it to you also pay for your first-class seat to the islands? Or was that just the leftover change from the money I sent for Mom's spine? Leo looked at the floor. He didn't have a script for this. He looked like a child caught with his hand in a jar, and for the first time, the golden child shimmer was gone. He just looked small and greedy. My Aunt Sarah stood up. She looked at the tickets, then at my mother, then at me. She saw my gray skin and my hollow eyes. She saw the way my scrubs were hanging off my frame because I dropped 15 pounds from stress and exhaustion. Diane, Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave. You told me she was being a brat. You told me she was making you beg for every penny. You had me call her and scream at her. I wanted us to have a nice time, my mother whispered. She started to cry, but it wasn't the loud, theatrical crying she usually did. It was the quiet, desperate whimpering of someone who knew the game was over. We haven't had a vacation in years, Sarah, and Lily makes so much money at the hospital. I don't make so much money, I snapped. I worked 3 jobs, I gave up my condo, I gave up my life because I thought you were dying. You looked me in the eye and told me you were going paralyzed. My father finally spoke. He looked at the tickets on the table as if they were a bomb. Lily, let's talk about this privately. We can sort out the money later. Your mother is clearly stressed. No, Bob, Aunt Sarah interrupted, turning on my father. You had to know, you watched her pack, you watched Leo get that watch. You let this girl bleed herself dry for a tan. She picked up the tickets and threw them at my father's chest. I'm disgusted, Sarah said. She grabbed her purse and looked at the neighbors, who were already standing up to leave, their faces masks of pure awkwardness. Come on, we're leaving. I'm not sitting at this table for another second. The neighbors scurried out behind her. The front door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was the heaviest thing I'd ever felt. It was just the 4 of us, the family. My mother suddenly stood up, her back pain completely forgotten. She lunged for the folder, her face twisted in a snarl. You think you're so smart, she spat at me. You've ruined everything. That money is mine. You gave it to me. It was a gift. It was a transfer for medical services, I said, stepping back. And since there are no services, the bank has already flagged it as fraud. The $17,000 that was left in your account, it's already gone, Mom. I reversed it yesterday. The scream she let out was primal. She started throwing things, the bread rolls, the salt shakers, the folder. Leo just sat there, staring at his laptop, realizing his vacation was vanishing in real time. My father sat at the head of the table, his head in his hands, finally realizing that the piece he'd worked so hard to keep was gone forever. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a notification from the bank. The reversal was complete. I'm leaving, I said. Don't you dare walk out that door, my mother screamed. You owe me, I gave you life, you're a selfish, hateful girl. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt tired. You didn't give me life, Mom, I said quietly. You just gave me a bill, and as of tonight I'm paid in full. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. By the time I reached my car, my phone started buzzing. 43 messages in 10 minutes, apologies from Aunt Sarah, accusations from Leo, begging from my father. I didn't open a single one. I put the car in gear and drove toward the only place I felt safe, the diner. The fallout was swift and permanent. After I walked out, the bank's fraud investigation moved like a scalpel. They didn't just freeze the $17,400. They flagged every transaction my mother had made using my medical transfers over the previous 3 months. Because the travel agency booking had been made under false pretenses, the agency refused to issue a credit. The $7,000 deposit was gone. Leo's stainless steel watch was seized by my father and sold to pay for the property taxes I was no longer covering. I didn't stay to watch the house sell, but I heard about it from Aunt Sarah. My parents had to downsize to a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. Leo had to drop out of his final semester to work at a warehouse because no one would give him a loan. The golden child finally had to get his hands dirty. I quit my jobs at the hospital and the 2 extra gigs. I had enough recovered money to live simply while I finished my degree on my own terms. I moved into a small, quiet apartment 3 towns over. It has 1 bedroom, a lock that only I have the key to, and a window that looks out over a park. I went back to the Cloverleaf Diner one last time, but not for a shift. I sat in a booth by the window as a guest. Mrs. Hayes walked over, her face softening when she saw me in a clean sweater, my skin finally holding some color. She didn't ask how I was. She just set a cup of coffee down and nodded at my textbook. "You look like yourself again," she said. When I left, I tucked a $100 bill under the saucer and a small note that said, "Thank you for reminding me that the cup was mine to fill." Back at my apartment, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop to check my enrollment status. My old, cracked work name tag was sitting by the lamp. I picked it up, feeling the jagged edge where it had snapped in the diner office. I didn't feel the need to tape it back together anymore. I walked over to the kitchen and dropped it into the trash can. Then I reached into my drawer and pulled out my brand new passport. The pages were crisp and empty. There were no first-class tickets tucked inside. There was no deadline, just the possibility of going somewhere because I wanted to, not because I was paying for someone else's escape. I'm 26 years old. I have a smaller life now. It's quieter. It's lonelier sometimes. But it's mine. I have one question for you. Would you have returned the folder to your mother to give her a chance to come clean? Or would you have let her show up at the airport just to find out the flight was canceled at the check-in desk? Let me know in the comments. If you've ever had to choose yourself over a family lie, I want to hear your story. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more. You might also want to check out my other story about the daughter who discovered her parents' secret bank account after 10 years of poverty.